Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly,
the numbers were sitting on the desk inside the executive suites at Espn, and nobody in that building could quite believe what they were looking at. For decades, traditional sports media executives operated under a set of rigid, unwritten rules about what audiences would and wouldn't watch during prime-time slots. But on one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a single viewership report shattered those decades-old assumptions into pieces. When Stephen A. Smith leaned directly into his microphone during a live broadcast of First Take, he didn't just share a statistic, he delivered a reality check that sent shockwaves through the entire athletic landscape. He officially confirmed that a single individual had just propelled network metrics to levels previously thought completely impossible for women's professional basketball. The figures were so high that they didn't just beat previous league records, they completely annihilated them, routinely outperforming established men's major league broadcasts on competing networks. But while network executives were quietly celebrating this massive financial windfall, a much darker, far more intense dynamic was beginning to brew behind the scenes. The exact viewership figures that came rolling into the headquarters were nothing short of mind-boggling for industry analysts who had spent years predicting slow, incremental growth. Regular season broadcasts that previously struggled to pull in modest regional audiences were suddenly averaging over 2 million dedicated viewers per game. When peak moments hit late in close fourth quarters, those numbers spiked to nearly 3 million people glued to their screens at the exact same time. To put that into absolute perspective, those ratings were consistently beating prime-time regular season games in Major League Baseball, high-stakes NHL playoff matchups, and several high-profile NBA broadcasts. Stadiums across the country that had historically operated at half capacity were selling out weeks in advance, with secondary market ticket prices skyrocketing by over 1,000% whenever a certain rookie walked into the arena. It wasn't just a slight uptick in general interest, it was a total overhaul of modern sports consumption patterns. Yet, as the ratings soared higher with every passing week, the public reaction from inside the basketball community wasn't pure celebration, and that was where things started getting complicated. Behind closed doors and across various sports podcasts, a visible wave of friction began to rise among legacy figures who had spent decades building the league from scratch. Former Hall of Famers and active veterans seemed openly hesitant to embrace the narrative that one rookie was responsible for this unprecedented boom. Controversial statements started flying across public platforms, with former superstars openly minimizing historical achievements or issuing ominous warnings that reality was coming for the new arrival. Incorrect statistics were cited on public broadcasts to diminish historical college records, and media commentators debated whether the unprecedented attention was earned or handed out due to marketability. The tension on the court became completely tangible, with hard fouls and intentional physical plays instantly going viral, sparking heated debates across every social media platform on the internet. Fans who had never watched a single possession of women's basketball in their lives were suddenly tuning in just to see how the veteran guard would handle the brutal physicality being thrown her way every night. But that was only the beginning of a much larger, highly public media war. The situation reached an absolute boiling point on live network television, when Stephen A. Smith lost his patience with fellow analysts who tried to dodge the obvious truth. In a series of fiery, viral exchanges, he directly confronted co-hosts and sports journalists who argued that the boom was merely a collective, gradual rising tide. He leaned forward, slammed his hands on the desk, and demanded that people speak the plain truth without tiptoeing around sensitive modern media feelings. He explicitly pointed out that while the entire league was undoubtedly benefiting from the newly arriving cash flow, There was only one specific individual driving the ratings, filling the seats, and forcing television networks to rewrite their multi-million-dollar contracts. The argument became so tense that you could literally feel the discomfort in the studio, highlighting a massive ideological divide between traditional sports journalism and the stark economic reality unfolding right before their eyes. The public debate wasn't just about basketball anymore. It had morphed into a heated narrative about credit, legacy, economics, and media gatekeeping. And as the on-air shouting matches intensified, the actual drama on the hardwood was rapidly escalating into a daily primetime soap opera. Every single game night began to feel like a high-stakes dramatic spectacle, where every movement, gesture, and foul was analyzed under a microscopic lens by millions of online viewers. High-profile rivalries that originated back in high-pressure college tournaments were reignited on the professional stage, with even more intensity and animosity. Hard shoulder checks, taunting gestures, and missed calls from officials weren't just standard athletic occurrences anymore. They became instant national news headlines, debated on morning news shows. When an unprovoked off-ball shove occurred during an inbound play in Indianapolis, the internet practically exploded with outrage, causing commentators, former players, and cultural critics to weigh in on whether the rookie was being targeted out of sheer professional envy. Social media engagement skyrocketed to historic levels, generating billions of digital impressions that completely outpaced traditional men's sports leagues over the exact same time period. The conflict was driving engagement, the engagement was driving viewership, and the viewership was generating an unbelievable amount of revenue that no one in authority could afford to ignore. The economic paradox sitting at the absolute center of this entire saga made the dynamic even more surreal for average observers tracking the news. While the league was generating record-breaking television contracts and pulling in tens of millions of dollars in new corporate sponsorships, the actual starting rookie salary was set at a humble $76,000 a year. Meanwhile, outside endorsement deals were reaching staggering figures, including a massive 8-year, $28 million signature sneaker deal with Nike that eclipsed the entire salary cap of multiple professional teams combined. The sheer presence of massive, chaotic crowds at public airports created immediate safety concerns, forcing the league to finally abandon decades of policy and implement a full-season charter flight program for every single team. For years, players had publicly begged and campaigned for charter travel without success, only for the infrastructure to magically materialize overnight once a single rookie brought an unprecedented security presence to public gates. The shift proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the corporate landscape had fundamentally altered forever. But what was happening behind the scenes at major broadcasting studios was even more drastic than what was occurring in team front offices. Inside the production suites at major networks, programming directors were throwing out entire summer scheduling maps to clear room for extra emergency broadcasts. Games that were originally scheduled to play on niche streaming apps or regional cable channels were abruptly bumped up to primetime network television slots on weekends. Executive producers quickly realized that putting any other content in those time slots was quite literally leaving millions of dollars of advertising revenue on the table. Corporate sponsors were practically lining up down the block, willing to pay top-dollar commercial rates that were historically reserved only for late-stage playoff games or massive holiday events. The demand was so overwhelming that executives from competing networks began making desperate inquiries behind the scenes, scrambling to secure partial broadcast rights or sub-license deals just to get a small piece of the pie. The sheer magnitude of the audience numbers proved that the old media playbook regarding women's sports programming was completely obsolete, forcing an entire industry to recalibrate its long-term financial forecasts overnight. Yet, despite the massive financial victory, the deep-seated tensions within the sport showed absolutely zero signs of slowing down. As the season progressed, every single milestone achieved by the rookie was met with a bizarre mixture of awe from the general public and persistent downplaying from select circles of the veteran establishment. Breaking the single-season assist record, recording historical rookie triple-doubles, and leading a struggling franchise straight into the postseason were accomplishments that should have united the basketball world in celebration. Instead, every single milestone seemed to ignite yet another round of exhausting debates regarding modern play styles, defense intensity, and targeted media narratives. When veteran players were asked about these broken records during post-game press conferences, their answers were often clipped, reserved, or carefully curated to avoid offering direct praise to the individual, driving their league's new financial reality. Stephen A. Smith regularly returned to his platform to highlight this bizarre dynamic, calling it one of the most glaring cases of professional envy ever witnessed in the history of modern American athletics. The contrast between the sheer adoration from casual fans and the icy-cold response from veteran peers created a continuous, self-sustaining news cycle that kept the topic trending at the absolute top of global search engines. To fully comprehend the sheer scale of this media earthquake, one has to examine the bleak historical backdrop that preceded this unprecedented explosion. For nearly 3 decades, women's professional basketball operated in a frustrating economic reality, where television networks treated broadcasts almost as an act of corporate community service, rather than a high-yield investment. Ratings routinely hovered in the low hundreds of thousands, stadium seats were frequently left empty, and media executives openly argued that the sport simply lacked the raw entertainment value required to drive mainstream consumer interest. Analysts repeatedly claimed that without above-the-rim athleticism or dramatic trash-talking rivalries, the audience ceiling would remain permanently capped. But that long-standing consensus completely disintegrated the moment logo three-pointers began raining down from 40 feet away during a historic college run that captivated tens of millions of household viewers. The national championship broadcast between Iowa and South Carolina didn't just beat expectations. It pulled in a staggering 18.9 million viewers, officially surpassing the men's national championship game for the first time in recorded television history. When that massive college fan base followed a single player directly into the professional ranks, the league's existing infrastructure was caught completely unprepared for the incoming tidal wave. Suddenly, local security teams were completely overwhelmed by thousands of fans flooding arena entrances hours before tip-off just to watch a standard pre-game warm-up routine. Merchandising vendors ran out of jerseys within minutes of setting up shop, as demand outstripped supply by an astonishing margin across every major retail outlet in the country. Opposing teams quickly realized that their standard home court advantages were effectively erased, as traveling crowds filled away arenas with matching jerseys, drowning out local fans with deafening cheers. The shift was so sudden and intense that it fractured the quiet, close-knit culture of a league that had functioned for decades out of the mainstream spotlight. Veteran players who had spent years competing in relative anonymity were suddenly confronted by thousands of screaming fans, invasive media cameras, and a relentless 24-hour news cycle that picked apart every single possession on national television. This sudden shift created an unbearable amount of pressure within locker rooms across the country, leading to passive-aggressive podcast appearances and tense post-game exchanges. When Cheryl Swoops, a legendary pioneer of the women's game, publicly claimed on a popular podcast that the rookie's scoring records were somehow less impressive because she was supposedly a fifth-year player taking 50 shots a game, the internet immediately brought out the receipts to prove those claims were factually incorrect. The backlash was swift and merciless, but it exposed a deeper, far more complex truth about human nature and professional legacy. Legacy stars who had sacrificed their bodies for pennies, played overseas during grueling off-seasons just to make a decent living, and fought endlessly for basic respect, felt understandable resentment when a brand new rookie stepped onto the floor, making millions in outside endorsements before playing a single professional minute. They felt the history of the league was being erased by an overeager national media that acted as if basketball didn't exist prior to the year 2024. But while their emotional frustration was understandable, their attempt to downplay the economic reality was financially indefensible. Stephen A. Smith became the central figure in calling out this logical fallacy on live television week after week, refusing to let commentators rewrite the clear narrative. During one particularly heated episode of First Take, he confronted co-host Monica McNutt after she suggested that media coverage of the league had been lacking for years due to institutional neglect. Stephen A. retaliated by pointing out that he had personally pushed for coverage for over 15 years. But television networks are ultimate consumer-driven businesses that respond directly to audience demand and raw viewership data. He bluntly stated that you cannot force an audience to watch something they aren't interested in, and that when an individual finally comes along who commands that audience organically, you don't criticize that individual or question their impact. You lean into it completely. He declared on national radio that those within the basketball community who were trying to dilute the credit were actively shooting themselves in the foot, risking the greatest financial boom the sport had ever seen out of misguided personal pride. The tension reached its absolute peak during a mid-season game against Chicago, when an aggressive off-ball shoulder check sent the star rookie crashing hard to the hardwood floor. The foul itself was physical, but the immediate reaction from the crowd, the media, and social media platforms elevated the moment into a national cultural event. Within minutes, clips of the play accumulated tens of millions of views, with sports pundits, former NBA stars, and cultural commentators taking opposing sides in a furious online debate. Some argued that hard fouls were simply a welcome to the league rite of passage that every superstar must endure, pointing back to the legendary beatings Michael Jordan took at the hands of the Detroit Pistons in the late 1980s. Others argued that targeting the single player responsible for filling stadium seats and paying everyone's future salary was completely reckless, short-sighted, and dangerously counterproductive. The controversy dominated primetime news programming for an entire week, completely eclipsing major stories in men's professional leagues and proving that the sport had officially crossed over into mainstream pop culture dominance. As the physical style of play continued, every single foul call was endlessly scrutinized by refereeing panels and dissected on highlight shows across every major network. Opposing defense strategies were explicitly constructed to double-team, trap, and physically punish the rookie at every turn, attempting to test her mental composure under extreme pressure. But instead of cracking under the overwhelming weight of national expectation, the performance levels actually escalated to an entirely new tier. Historic stat lines began piling up week after week, including the first rookie triple-double in franchise history, followed shortly after by the single-game assist record that completely tore apart established defensive schemes. The narrative shifted from whether the rookie could adapt to the professional game to whether the professional game could adapt to the overwhelming pace and range of a generational talent. The sheer brilliance of the court vision and passing ability forced even the most persistent critics to acknowledge that the hype was not merely a creation of slick corporate marketing, but a direct result of rare, unmitigated basketball genius.